everybody, and welcome to another special edition of the College Rugby Wrap Up, CRWU, if you want the acronym. I'm Matt McCarthy in Midtown Manhattan. Zach Lanning is a maniac up in Maine. In Jersey is Colby Marshall. And in this igloo in Halifax, Nova Scotia, is Bryan Ray of America's Rugby News. And we're going to get to him because, ladies and gentlemen, we're doing a deep dive, another one of our deep dive segments in which we look closely at one aspect in the college rugby landscape. And this time we're going north. No, we're not just going north of New York. We're going to the Great White North, into Canada. So that's why Brian's on here, because we're talking Canadian collegiate rugby. And just to spare you guys from my voice, Zach, the only other bald guy here, is going to take over.
Thanks, Matt. Yes, I will bring here. And then usually I'm the northern correspondent, but Brian, yeah, even farther north than I am, watching some of these games on the Rugby Network, it looks like it's a little cold up there, a little snowy. How's the weather up in Canada?
Yeah, a little on the brisker side, actually. Expecting a little bit of a storm later tonight to wipe out some power maybe. But hey, I'm in an igloo. I don't care. This is actually just, glow bugs that are floating around in my room, keeping me lit. So we're doing all right.
The storms strengthen the igloos, right?
Absolutely. They're totally weatherproof.
Did you get any of the Buffalo blizzard?
Buffalo blizzard? It's just a tiny little thing compared to what we had up here. Come on, call that a blizzard.
All right. Okay.
We do, Brian, for you, have a blizzard of questions because we are not, you like that transition, Matt? That was kind of a pro level transition there, but we are not necessarily well versed in the Canadian collegiate rugby scene. We've been doing a lot on U.S. college scene for a while now, but we really wanted to talk about this upcoming collegiate university men's rugby championship that the Rugby Network is streaming, and we couldn't think of a better person to bring in to chat about that. So we're going to just kind of get into some of the, the basics to kind of educate ourselves and our audience a little bit more about the collegiate rugby scene up in Canada, if that's all right with you. So we could start out, just kind of tell us a little bit about how the Canadian, collegiate rugby system compares to the way they run things here in the U.S. Is it kind of like in the U.S., a sea of acronyms, as Matt likes to say, with all these different, organizing governing bodies, things like that? How does it compare to the U.S. collegiate rugby scene?
Right. It's funny you're asking me for an explanation. I'd like an explanation on how the American system works. I've been writing on rugby North America for a long time, and I still don't have a clue what they're doing down there. It's pretty straightforward, really, up north. We don't have D1A college, small college, any of that crap is one level. 30 odd teams, 35 or something like that, and they're all competing for spots in this national championship, and they're divided by region. So you'd have the Prairies, Ontario has their own competition, Quebec has their own, and then you have the Atlantic provinces, and then you have BC. Of course, they're special, they're separated by some mountains or something. So it's a very regional setup, and then they all come together and they play in this championship. And it's a new thing. This has only been happening since 2017. We didn't have a national championship before that. So that's the setup. And important to note, this isn't a varsity competition. This isn't. So in Canada, you have the NCAA in the States. We have U Sports in Canada. That would be our equivalent. But men's rugby is not a U Sports. It's not a competition for U Sports. Women's rugby is. Men's rugby is not. So a lot of these teams are just club size, basically. Some of them get some support from the university, but they wouldn't be full varsity status like other teams. So it's a little different in that regard too.
Well, that's kind of the way it is here. I mean, the men's clubs they're just clubs.
Right. I don't understand it because you got all these acronyms, you got letters and things. Guys are saying D1A. Are they varsity D1A? Like, I don't understand what's going on in the American college system.
I have to send you a link to our explanation of the college.
Yeah, the booklet that I need to read.
Brian, I do actually have a question. So in regards to the university programs down in Canada, do they, I guess, operate the same way as U.S. programs do in terms of them being sort of bottom feeders and developmental sides for the MLR and for the professional teams?
Not really. No, you got to look at, in Canada, we have a pretty robust provincial age grade system, right? So, I don't know how the states do. Again, another confusing thing for me, domestic rugby, I don't think there's a regional age grade competition nationwide. Here in Canada, we have these nice provinces that are set up. Every province has a provincial side. They have provincial age grade sides. They go to the Canadian Rugby Championship, which it's not a senior thing now, but we still have the age grade national championships. So they come up through those systems. They go to the Canada U20 program from that. And those are really the guys who form the foundation of making the next level into the national team and into the MLR. And then we have the Pacific Pride program as well, which is our, centralized program out in Victoria. A lot of the guys who don't go to university go to there. Some of our top guys, and other guys pick up academy deals in Europe. So it's not really the universities that are funneling up into MLR. I mean, MLR, remember, is just really new, 5 years, right? So it's really our age grade programs that are feeding those programs. And our players, frankly, are more prepared to move into professional rugby than the Americans, because we start a little bit early. We have a pretty robust high school program and age grade program at provincial. So that's really what's building up towards that. So the university is literally just the best of that school. Now, look, there are some programs, UBC and UVic, University of Victoria, that have traditionally kind of recruited from across the country and become kind of de facto academy programs. But that's not, that hasn't been the case for most of the country up to now.
So that's something, Bryan, I was interested in as well. You mentioned a couple of those programs. Are there like a traditionally, or historically just top tier programs like a Cal that we have in the States, or a Lindenwood? Would it be those two programs you just mentioned? Are there more than that, or what are the top tier schools in Canada?
Yeah, absolutely. University of Victoria and University of BC. And they have this very distinct advantage in that because they're in BC, they have that geography. They have those big old mountains in the way. So they traditionally played in the club season there, which runs from the fall right through to the spring, whereas everybody else, they play their rugby in just a limited fall windows when they would play. So they have a longer season to develop, and it's just a long history. BC rugby is just such a great history at the domestic level. So it's just been a great spot. They've had great coaching historically, those two teams. So lately it's been UBC who've been, if you look at the results of these prior championships, they've won 3 of the 4 tournaments so far. UVic won the other one. So, those are the two powerhouse ones. If you were going to say who is the Cal, you would say UBC, who traditionally travels down to play against Cal, right? So, those are the two powerhouse ones.
Now, University of Victoria did sneak in one victory here, but they won't be winning it this year. The tournament is actually being played while we are recording this, so a couple of games have gone by already, and they're actually upset University of Victoria Vikes by a Trinity Western Spartans team in the first round here in the quarterfinals of this tournament. How big of an upset is that, Bryan? I mean, what is that, is that a shock to the Canadian rugby landscape, or is it just, it is what it is?
I mean, I think a little bit of a shock in that UVic is such a traditional powerhouse, and they were the number 1 seeds heading into this. Certainly a very good team. If you look at their roster, they have, some MLR drafted guys on it. Denver Fat and Gabe Casey from the Arrows. Logan Martin-Feek, who was drafted last year by the Arrows. I think Ethan Hager was playing for them. He's going to play for Dallas. So, I mean, they're a good team. But Trinity Western's a fairly new program, or reestablished anyways. Andy Evans, who used to be the S&C coach for the Canadian men's side, he is now running that program. He's got Hubert Bidens, the ex-Canada prop, working with them. Giuseppe Dutoit, who used to play for the Arrows.
Giuseppe Dutoit.
I screw his name every time. Apologies, G. I'll just call him G from now on. So this is a well-coached side, and they certainly also got some good players. Temilor Alanusi, this big 6'7" winger who's played for Ireland Sevens with them, strike runner. Sam Weggert, this big, powerful center, is playing outside center for them. He's picked by Seattle in the draft. So they've got some good players too. So this is a good side. They beat Pacific Pride earlier this season. So it's not a huge shock to me. But certainly when you're looking at the historic results of this tournament, it's a good one. It's a great victory. This is probably the biggest win for that team in their kind of reestablished history.
And now maybe a more shocking result, or kind of a close escape here for the Guelph Griffins, who played Memorial University Seahawks in the second game today, escaping with a win at the death, 25-22. They scored right at the last whistle to pull that one out, Bryan. Is that maybe more of an even bigger shock to you, that result?
Yeah, I didn't expect Memorial to do that well. However, you have to, mention a couple of those players in that team. Tony Pomeroy, who's played with Canada U20s back in the day, just a little bit older than what you would expect from the university lineups. And a certain Patrick Parfrey seems to be pulling the strings. He's a grad student. People would know him obviously for winning many, many caps for Canada. So they do a little, because again, it's a club competition essentially. It's not like these guys are just all going to be from 18 to 22 years old, that kind of thing. You get some different players in there. So and look, at Memorial, any team coming out of St. John's, Newfoundland is going to be very, very tough physically. So no doubt they would push Guelph, but I would have expected Guelph to come through this a little bit better. They're coached by Corey Hector, who's an assistant with the Arrows, very strong side. Colby Faust apparently scored near the end of this. He's an Arrows player. So, I think that'd be, and they're the number 2 seeds heading in, the Ontario champions. So I would have expected a better win from them.
Now, Colby, you'd probably suit up for Iona again if you could. Are you out of your eligibility on this side? I know, Matt, you would definitely go to University of Buffalo, but Colby, I think you still might have a shot at Iona.
I could give them a solid half right now. Right now, I could give them a solid half.
Excellent. So a couple other matchups, and just to note, I guess, Bryan, it's true that each region will send one team to this, and then there are a wild card bid or two in the tournament.
Yeah, the top ones from each region, and then there's a couple other wild card qualifiers. They change it they got 8 teams. They've had 6 in the past before, so they change it up. I'm not entirely sure how the wild card thing works, but the top teams from each region do qualify. Yeah.
That's kind of like American Collegiate Rugby, where they change the rules every year in different tournaments and qualification process. We have something in common there. But yeah, tonight also playing UBC, the hosts, and probably prohibitive favorites at this point, right? Maybe playing Calgary Dinos, and then Laurier Golden Hawks will play McGill. I want to say, Bryan, also, I do love the school mascot names more than the American mascot names in Canada.
I was just thinking that.
The Dinos is great.
It has some flow. I was going to say the Calgary Dinos has some flow.
Yeah, there's certainly some fun teams. My team is the UNB Ironmen. They unfortunately didn't quite make it this year, beaten out by Memorial in the Atlantic Division. So, but lots of great names in Canadian rugby up in the universities.
Now, Bryan, being that UBC has won the tournament 3 out of the last 4 times in the past 4 years, would you consider them a favorite to win again based on that track record?
Yeah, well, they're just such a strong team traditionally. I mean, you look at their lineup stacked with, guys who come through the Canadian age grade programs. I mean, look at their team now. We've got Isaac Kelly, just played for the Canadian A side, this giant second row. He was down in, where were they? Brazil recently with that side. They've got James Biss, who's played with fly half for the U20s this year. Jacob Bossy, this hooker, they've got an outstanding prospect. He'll be a Canadian international. Their number 8, Relamu Wilson Valdez. He starred for the U20s this summer. Tremendous athlete, another one. They've just got talent right through that side, and they have great coaching. Curry Hitchborn is, just a fixture for them. So he's got, every year, their competitive side. They play great rugby. So, now that, UVic is the team you probably would have guessed or, picked to give them a shot. But with them out, you wonder, can the Spartans step up and maybe push UBC? But UBC, for me, far and away the favorites to lift the title now.
Bryan, is it about funding? I mean, how do these programs fund each other? Does the university kick into some schools, or does, what's the story there? Because it's different down here. It varies from school to school.
Yeah, and it's similar in that regard here. Some programs, depending on their status with the school, would get a little bit more. But really, it's the alumni who steps up for each of these teams. UBC is just tremendous alumni support. So that's who would be really funding that program and their ability to train almost in a daily training environment up there. University of Victoria, the same thing. And other programs are slowly building up, but and you see that kind of disparity in their regions. There's always going to be a couple teams that are just much stronger out in the Atlantic provinces. You'd have UNB. We have outstanding alumni in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. St. FX, who's traditionally very strong there, and then Memorial. I mean, Newfoundland rugby is just so those guys all support each other afterwards. So, everybody knows about Dr. Parfrey's influence in Canadian rugby, certainly helping out there. So, yeah, it's more the alumni who comes together, and also the Canadian Rugby Foundation, who is helping support this whole tournament. And, the long-term goal is obviously to get this to kind of that U Sports or full varsity status. So establishing this national championship kind of fulfills one of those criteria along that path.
And now, Bryan, some eagle-eyed viewers may have noticed that when I was reading through the matchups, I didn't mention Queens, who have kind of featured heavily in the results or the top 3 results of this tournament, not participating this year. They usually are the representative from the Ontario region, but it will be Wilfred Laurier. Am I pronouncing that right? Laurier. Okay, so Queens not in it this year. What gives? What happened to Queens?
They lost. Laurier beat them in the semifinal of the Ontario competition, and Guelph ended up winning the final. So it's that simple. Queens were top side in the the regular season round robin, and then when they got to the playoffs, they were just beaten. So it's just meritocracy. That's why they're out.
How many people say Gryphons instead of Griffins?
I hope not many.
Gryphons.
Man, as a fellow English major, you gotta know sometimes letters don't sound, the same in words like that.
Is that how Eric the Red spelled it, or Leif Erikson? Come on, what's with it's Griffin? Come on,
Giving me Gryffindor vibes.
I don't want to admit it. I am rewatching some of the Harry Potter movies. But we can move on from that. We don't have to get into my Harry Potter rewatching habits if you don't want. But Bryan, MLR teams you mentioned, some might be looking at this tournament. Toronto Arrows for sure, maybe other MLR franchises. Is that the case? Do they look for prospective talent? I mean, already some guys already drafted. From we played in previous tournaments, we're playing now. What's the kind of interest level in this tournament?
Yeah, I certainly hope that if any scouts, MLR scouts worth their salt, should be watching this. Absolutely. When we saw the number of Canadian players selected in this year's draft, and certainly heading towards in the future, some of these guys, Jacob Bossy, I've already mentioned, I think will be, once he gets there, as long as he, declares himself in the draft, I think will be a top selection. So yeah, they absolutely should. I mean, that's the similarity kind of with American rugby is, well, in my opinion anyway, there's not a whole lot of games that are actually worth watching, too many that are blowouts. And it's really once you get to those finals, the national finals, the D1A finals, for me, that's what I like to watch when it comes to American college rugby. And in Canadian rugby, I mean, the Arrows would be putting a closer look on with the whole Ontario scene to make sure they're covering their whole thing. But at the national level, this is the cream of the crop. This is the best ones. There's going to be the occasional prospect elsewhere, but most of the best players will be involved in this tournament. And certainly there'll be players playing in here that haven't been drafted that will be in the future.
Any scouts from the Vancouver MLR franchise at this tournament?
Wouldn't that be nice? BC, step up here. Get us another team.
They seem to be popping up all over the place now. So who knows? Maybe soon for that one. Colby, any final thoughts or any final questions for you on the tournament?
Who's your pick to win it all now? Is it UBC?
Oh, yeah.
Are you going with the favorites?
I would put money down on UBC.
Okay. Just making sure.
If there was a dark horse team, who might it be?
I have to go with Trinity Western. Now they're going to be confident. They've beat the Pride in the BC Premier League. By the way, that's another thing I should clarify is the BC teams play in the full men's league, whereas all these other university teams would play an actual university division. So that's a little bit of an advantage, when you're playing against these quality outfits that they do on a regular basis, ex-Canadian internationals all the time, right? So yeah, I would say Trinity Western, they're going to be feeling confident. They beat the Pacific Pride a short time ago, and now they've beaten UVic. So UBC is kind of the one they'd be targeting now. So if anyone's going to beat them, hey, you got to go with the hot sheet here. So yeah, I'm going to give shout outs to Andy Evans, their coach, and say, good luck, man. I hope you give him a good run. I'm looking forward to it. I'm still going to go with UBC as the favorites, but yeah, if there's a team that's suddenly the dark horse, it's the Spartans for sure.
Matt, any last questions here for Bryan?
Trinity Western's going to win it.
Calling it now.
I got another toonie on it with you, Ray. What do you say?
They're stacking up here, McCarthy.
Toonie, and of course, that maple glazed donut from Tim Hortons.
All right, you're on.
All right.
Let's go Trinity. Make sure you can see if Trinity does win or if Matt is right here. Quarterfinals are today, but the semifinals are going to be on Friday on the Rugby Network, and the final matchups will be on Sunday on the Rugby Network as well. Bryan, one last one for you, a bonus question here before we get out. it's a painful conversation to have for all of us. I think we're all kind of, our nations are in a similar boat here on the national scene, missing out on the World Cup here for the first time in a while for both nations. Does that have anything to do with the fact that we kind of rely on a collegiate rugby system? Although you said Canada, it doesn't necessarily to the extent the U.S. does, but does it have anything to do with the fact that, this is where we're developing our young players, a lot of the young players, instead of like an academy, a very strong, robust academy system like they have in Europe?
Well, it's a debate to be had. I mean, if you look at it, I mean, university, college is probably a good place to develop these guys if you have it coordinated properly, if you build links. You'll notice we've been mentioning a lot of MLR guys, playing in this competition. We don't have that restriction in Canada where if you've signed for an MLR team, you can't play for your school. Marcello Wainwright played for Guelph. He played for the Arrows, nothing stopping him. Riley DiNardo, same thing, went back to school and played more games for at the university level after playing for the Arrows. So that's a thing that I think the USA needs to sort out. I think there's a real opportunity here to kind of have a synergy. You can have both. You can have academy program like we have with the Pride for the guys who don't necessarily want to go to college, or that kind of thing, and then you use the college guys who want to get an education, which is always a good idea. So why are we kind of splitting these people apart? Why are we having this discussion where we're not utilizing every kind of development tool that we have? I think that's a real problem, something that particularly American rugby needs to sort out. Canadian rugby is doing a little bit better job of that. We kind of, do lean on the development thing. And I have to say that the whole collegiate draft has put a little bit more influence or importance kind of on the Canadian universities. But, if you have this synergy with the academies, with the clubs and the universities all building towards it, then we'll get better results. But it's pretty clear we don't have that right now. So, something to work on in the future.
Do you want Eddie Jones to come in to take over Canada for 8 years?
I'm happy to skip on Eddie. Thanks. As fun as he would be to interview, frankly, we'll pass on fast, Eddie.
Right, I have a good rant in our College Rugby Wrap Up podcast that's going out soon. That I was a little more a fan of bringing Eddie Jones in, but maybe I'm in the minority here. So
it was a passionate rant.
Maybe I don't know what I'm talking about.
No, you don't have
the Eddie Jones train.
Matt, do you have enough voice left here to close us out? What are you working with over there?
Show's got to go on. And gentlemen, I want to thank you on that note, Mr. Bryan Ray, Mr. Zach Lanning, and Mr. Colby Marsh. Thank you for tuning in to this special edition of the College Rugby Wrap Up, the deep dive on Canadian rugby. Check out our other episodes, including the MLR Weekly show with Mr. Sam Harris, the head coach of the Chicago Hounds, and, of course, the College Rugby Wrap Up that you guys do normally. And please check out our American Red Cross blood donor team.